We're good to
Nice.
go.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for either coming in or being online. I'm going to call the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization Ad Hoc Memorandum of Understanding Committee meeting to order. Going to read the notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, and ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants can mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use the *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Erin McGuire via the chat box at emcguire@ctps.org or 857-702-3681. This meeting is being recorded. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Erin McGuire via the chat box, via email at emcguire@ctps.org, or by calling 857-702-3681. Thank you. If everyone wants to, do you want to just do a roll call, Erin?
Yeah. Tom Bent,
Present.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, present.
Metro West Regional Collaborative,
Dennis Giametti.
MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning,
Yep, Derek Cravat here.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa here.
MassDOT,
John Romano here.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins here.
and the City of Boston. That calls the roll.
Okay, thank you. We're going to keep, I think what we'll do is we'll keep everyone muted and people can raise their hands to be heard. Okay. All right, so we just did item number 1, which was the introductions. Item number 2, public comments, or any members of the, if there's any members of the public and they'd like to comment, please do so now. If not, during the discussion, if there is a comment, just please raise your hand and we'll get to you after we get to the committee members. All right, seeing no comments. Agenda item number 3, process and themes for updates. Tegan, I think you're going to introduce the worksheet and then we'll kind of go on from there.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and it's good to see everyone. I'm very sorry I'm not there in person. I'm actually on day 6 of a COVID bout and I'm still recovering. So Annette's also going to be my partner in crime here in case it's kind of hard to follow from facilitating online, or if I get kind of wiped out or start coughing or something. So please, Annette is also my backup today. But hopefully you all saw the worksheet that I sent out, I think just later last week. And it is genuinely a work in process and meant to be a document that we can use to sort of facilitate this conversation. Initially it was briefer than this, but I think that it's hard to kind of look at it as a one-off without a little bit of introductory text about what the worksheet is supposed to be about. So what I was hoping to do today is really take this time to run through this document together and use it as a conversational piece. But again, Tom, as the chair, and others, if you want to take a conversation in any different direction, you're welcome to do so. Before I jump into it, though, Tom, I think we wanted to ask if there's anybody who would volunteer to report out on this meeting at the MPO meeting tomorrow because Tom will not be able to attend the MPO meeting. And usually during the committee chair report session, we would have just a report out on this. If someone would like to volunteer, we can put together some talking points for that person so that you're able to easily do that. And if nobody volunteers, we can work it out so that staff provides an update. But first wanted to ask, does anybody want to volunteer for that report out?
Any volunteers?
You have to do it.
Okay,
Thank you, Jen.
yeah, Jen's gonna volunteer.
Great, Jen, thanks for saying that. I couldn't see that. Good. Thank you very much, Jen. Okay. So with that, I am going to display my screen with a worksheet just so that we're all looking at the same thing. And if you at any point you want me to take it down, just let me know and I'm happy to do so. So can everybody see? Let me know when you can see it.
We can see it.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So with this, the first part of this worksheet just kind of provides the same context that we have shared at the first meeting. So just as a reminder, this is an ad hoc committee. We're here together supposedly for 3 meetings, unless you decide otherwise. And the point is to discuss what to recommend to the full board in terms of what the general topics are that should be updated in this next round of updating the MOU, as well as kind of some process recommendations towards making those updates. So again, just as a reminder, through this conversation, you get to make your own recommendations as to the scale of the update. Kind of like what you think should be in and out in terms of topics for the update, and then talk about the approaches. And so last time we did start to talk about some various questions you had about that and some approaches. And so this is a follow-on to that conversation. This document, this working, which already has typos in it, I can see, this working document can serve as a framework for how you want to make recommendations to the full board, which would be on November 30th at the annual meeting. Or you could decide that you want it to be in another format. It's completely up to you. So that's the context for this working sheet that we have here. Tom, if you want, I could pause there to see if anybody has any questions or comments about this.
Just on my end, one of the things like we discussed the other day, one of the recommendations maybe was, I think we want to talk about is whether or not like the different things that we may be putting forward. Do we really want to put that right to the full board, or do we want to recommend to the chair that this should go to be like a regular committee, process? Because it may be a lot of items for the full board to try to tackle. We're not really given, what David basically has said to us is, we want you to put forward like recommendations as to how the board should process some of these different ideas. So that's just a comment that I have that we might want to think about. John?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, as I was reading through it, and in a lot of places, I think the staff kind of raises that question a bunch of times, and my notes that I was writing through this is I think that having been on the last ad hoc committee, you were on that yourself.
Yep.
I think the board would appreciate that this stuff comes through us as the ad hoc committee first, and that we kind of run through it and flesh out some ideas and then make recommendations to the full board, and not kind of dump everything back to the full board first. I think it makes more sense for things to be run through the ad hoc committee.
I think the question was in tagging, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we discussed it, it was like David didn't want us to make actual recommendations. It was more about like the process on how the board should go forward with things. It sounds a little confusing, but Dagan, do I have that right?
Yeah, just to say the same thing, essentially, Tom, just a little bit differently.
Yeah.
The early discussions about how to move forward with this next phase was with, I think, primarily, David as the chair, and Eric, I think you were there as well as the vice chair. There was just a basic acknowledgement, like we don't have consensus on how to move forward with these updates yet, and it is hard to have these conversations in the full board context. And it is possible that board members would all want to be engaged in the conversation. So just not having yet kind of a consensus around how to move forward. I think David and we all discussed and decided that some subset of the board members should recommend how to move forward. And if that recommendation is to have a committee, then that is fine. And that is something that if the board agrees on, we can move forward with.
Yeah, my recommendation is to have a committee. Right.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
John just basically said his recommendation would be to have a committee. Does anyone else have, looks like Leonard, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think the question is whether we send this meeting to the chair, or whether we send it to the whole board, our recommendation about how to move forward. Right now, before we've done this meeting, I would say, send it to the chair and then let the chair decide whether or not the chair wants to bring it before the whole board. But I would suggest that we go through this meeting and then see how we feel, maybe after this meeting, before making that decision, unless you feel that making that decision now will determine how we have this meeting. If that's the case, then I'll stick with my current thinking, which is that we are making a recommendation to the chair about how to move forward, because the discussion about the MOU will then take place later on, unless our decision is that we're not going to do anything beyond this. But that's not what we're going to decide. The whole purpose of this is how to move forward beyond this committee. So that should be the purview, I think, of the chair at this point, rather than the full committee, because I don't know if the full committee would be informed enough to really weigh in. So that's it. Thank you.
Leonard, yeah, my thought was, the reason why I brought it up at the beginning, I just wanted people thinking about it as we kind of go through the process today. And at the end of the day, then we can decide, how we want to move forward on it. But I would agree. Any recommendation that comes out of the ad hoc committee would have to go to the chair of the MPO, and then David would decide if he, our recommendation may be, this is a lot for the board to go through. We're thinking, if you want to form a committee, that would be our recommendation, and then see where that lands. So, but it was more, I just wanted people start to think about it a little bit right at the beginning here. And then maybe by the end of the meeting, we can then decide which way we want to go. Thank you. Anybody else? Good.
Just maybe to add to that, I think if we do have the recommendation after we go through the meeting that we think a committee ought to, pursue some of these issues, I think doing the work I think we set out to do today of identifying those topics and maybe even key decision points, just so that we can make it clear that if we're proposing a committee, that people can understand what the communication between the committee and the MPO board will be, so that and that I think if we can identify what those key decision points might be anticipated, then we can assure people that we'll present on them before we actually go ahead and make a final decision or anything.
In my thought too was that if David does decide to appoint a committee, it'll probably be most of us again anyway. So, but it was more just to kind of, but I agree with you. Yeah, and that's the point of today, is to try to get some of these things, decided. Right. All right, Tegan. Sorry for interrupting you, but
No, please go ahead. No, please go ahead. The last thing I need to be doing is talking this whole time anyway. So please take over and facilitate the conversation, Tom, particularly because you're in the room when it's appropriate. So that'll go better. Okay. So would you like me to start into the topic areas?
Sure.
Okay. So the first section here just lists all of the topics that have come up to date. And then the second section has the process kind of questions. And I think that this has been relatively well vetted in the first meeting, but I also think it's worth talking about this again together at the second meeting to see if we think we're still missing anything that you brought up last meeting, or if anything else came up in your mind as far as things that you want to highlight that the board, the committee, whatever entity it is in fact considering in the update to the MOU. What we did do in this version is group them a bit and group them by topics to be updated that might have the same process. So for example, there's a grouping at the top here of topics that could probably be addressed through staff recommendations. So staff could really drive the process. And you'll see kind of that highlight later in the process section. But the things that we group together in this category are the kind of that overall description and objectives of the 3C process, kind of wording changes overall, the updates to voting rules, just to make sure there's no ambiguity. So not a big change, just a clarification. Some updated language around what we mean when we say we're striving for geographic and demographic equity in a way that's now better reflecting the goals of the MPO. Revising sections, particularly like the tip section, to make sure that what's in the operations plan is the right level of detail relative to what's in the MOU. And then also establishing the new review cycle. Like we can recommend something that we think makes sense for you all, along with the operations plan cycle and other cycles that might make sense. So those we think are more straightforward in terms of staff can make revisions and recommendations on our own probably, and then bring them to whichever entity it makes sense to bring them to for consideration, deliberation. And then we think the other ones might go through a different process. So the other ones I just mentioned, we think that the conversation around the RTAs and their role in decision-making on the board is probably its own process because it needs to engage the RTAs themselves. You guys have already talked about that. Similar, we think that a standalone is the, revising the definition of the role of the Regional Transportation Advisory Council. I know staff and Len and potentially the Advisory Council as a whole are already starting to work on this, and that will likely be where that a recommended change will sort of generate from and then be brought to either a committee or the board or whatever it is. There is a new topic that I think we brought up last time. I tried to indicate where I thought ones weren't in the list that we showed you last meeting, just so that it's easy to differentiate. This idea of committee governance, is there a reason to consider further like clarity and definition around what the governance of the committees can look like? Now, granted, the chair appoints committees and the chair appoints the chair of the committees. That's in the operations plan and is dictated. But if you all want to talk about, or if the appointed group wants to talk about whether there's some limitations on who can serve in the leadership role, whether or not, committees have to have bylaws, that was a topic that came up, I think, in our conversations. Another topic that is a standalone topic is the fiduciary agent agreement update. This is its whole own process. It does need to be brought to the board for approval in the end. But right now, this is something that is in the works and underway between primarily MEPC and CTPS staff. And that will eventually come to a format where it will be reviewed and potentially approved. Then the last two bullets, and then I'll pause and happy to let you, Tom, facilitate conversation. We grouped together two of the bullet points from last time into kind of an agency collaboration conversation. And the reason being is I think that these conversations could use some workshopping with, kind of the relevant representatives from the different agencies that we collaborate with to talk a little bit more about what this kind of collaboration could look like or could be clarified more to look like. And that's the process for establishing the financial constraint and development of the TIP targets, which is the section that refers to the target funding formula, which we talked about last time is a complicated thing that might deserve updating across the state. And the other one is the coordination with MassDOT and the T around the program for mass transportation, as well as RTAs, capital investment program, and then the MPO's TIP and long range plan. And then the last topic area is around board education and development. And so I put a couple of things together that we talked about last time, which is about putting in some expectations around annual coordination for MPOs across the state, as well as board participation in the annual conference, the MPO annual conference. So those were some opportunities. So that's the list. I think the questions here are things missing? Are they grouped incorrectly? Is there any other thing you want to talk about in terms of the topics? This isn't about process. This is more about like the universe of things to be updated. And I can give it off to you, Tom, to facilitate the conversation.
Thanks, Tegan. I guess the first item is the items that Tegan put forward about the staff recommended content. Does everyone agree that, those, those few bullets that would rely on the staff to get back to us?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, everybody good with that?
Yeah, I thought it was a good list.
Yep.
Yeah, it was. And then, the issue with the, like Tegan said that Len, your group is digging into the RTA's role in all this. And any idea when you'll have that back to us?
Well,
No,
Mr.
so
Sorry.
sorry.
I'm sorry. No, please take it.
Okay, so
I'm
for
sorry.
His is the role of RTAC.
I'm sorry, I meant RTAC, sorry.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, whenever people tell us they want it done, that's when we'll have it done. Right now, we are just starting, and we do have an election coming up, And so we need to just kind of get through that, and then I think we can get the ball rolling. But generally, if someone tells me they want something done, at a given time, I aim to get it done by then. So the short
Kagan, is
answer to your
there-
question is no.
Okay.
I don't
Kagan,
have a
is
plan
there-
time. Go ahead.
Kagan, is there a timeline on that we're looking for on that?
No, we don't have timelines on here yet, and I think that's going to depend on how the process ends up unfolding because as Brian's hand raised, I see, will remember from the operations plan, you can kind of develop an order by which a committee or the board would kind of look at and address each thing, and so we would still need to determine that timeline.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'm not sure what's going on with my camera here, so but you're probably better off you can't see me. I wanted to put something on the table, and it has to do with who approves the MOU. It seems to me like what we're doing is amending amendments to a document that was originally signed in the early 70s. And it's a document that, frankly, I think lacks legitimacy. I don't know. I mean, I've heard from many towns, why does town so-and-so get to vote for me? And you can say, well, that's because the chief elected official elected them. But if the town in the first place never agreed to that process, it just doesn't seem to be working. So I would like to have a discussion about more holistically what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And if it's putting down on a piece of paper that municipalities and the Commonwealth agree in this area, this part of the state, to allocate funds for transportation, then I think we need to go through a process of getting a majority of the communities in this region to approve it. Now, I know that's going to be a huge lift, but I also just think we have to discuss it because, frankly, I don't know how we're even doing this right now. I don't know. Does the state give us the authority to do this? Under what legal venue or statute can we do this? So that's where I'm at. Sorry if I jumped ahead.
Oh, that's fine. Kagan, I'm not sure. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I highlighted it on the screen showing now. I think, Brian, I think not to say anything bad about it, I think you did jump ahead a little bit, which is fine, which is sort of the questions that you all started to raise about the process overall. So regardless of what the topics are being updated, you all brought up a couple of key points, and we brought up a couple of key points for you to consider. And those 3 bullets are here in this kind of introductory section of the process. One was, should we talk about at a big picture from the very beginning, or carry out some kind of peer exchange on what MOUs look like across and different governance structures and MPO structures look like across the country? Is that something that should be talked about right off the bat? Should the fundamental framework of the document be revisited? And through that confirming, kind of the audience and what the real expectations are for this document. And then also, to your point directly, Brian, thinking about who needs to be engaged in this development of the MOU. And given that it applies to the entire region, is there a need to engage municipalities across the region to do this update? I have a perspective personally that this is an MOU that affects the region as a whole. And so there should be some thought as to the engagement of the region, even if somebody's not holding a seat right now, that there may be some engagement there is engagement that's appropriate. But I think there's a huge scale you could consider there from, to your point, Brian, getting a majority of municipalities to directly buy into it versus just trying to share information and raise awareness. So that's a whole range I think you all should discuss in this forum and talk about what you think the board and the chair should consider doing.
Well, thank you. And Tom, if I could just quickly follow up, I'd also like us to have a bit of a broader think about what is it we're trying to accomplish here. This is supposed to be an agreement between a bunch of legal entities agreeing how to divide up federal transportation planning funds and federal implementation funds over a specific period of time. And I think it behooves us to kind of start at a very big, from a very high level and try to work our way down to specifics And I think one of the things the operations plan was kind of meant to do was take a lot of the specifics out of this document and make this more general and more sort of aspirational based. And so just in terms of not just process, but who, what, where, why, and how, I would like us to get back to kind of the fundamentals on this one. I'm done throwing monkey wrenches into the works, Tom. Thank you.
All right, thank you. What I'll do, because that did jump ahead a little bit, I just want to wrap up the first. Well, first of all, does anyone else have any comments on what Brian just had to say?
The only thing I would just add is, and maybe staff could find this and pass it around, there is federal law that, identifies how MPOs are supposed to be regulated and my memory of it is that there is a lot of deference given to governors on deciding MPO boundaries and things like that. So maybe passing that around could be helpful just as a baseline for kind of what is the legal grounding for creating this MOU. And then Brian, your computer, right above your camera is a little like thing that opens up that can open and close your camera. Try to open that.
Yeah, there you go.
No.
Oh, we see his shield, his coat of arms.
Anyways.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just to expand on Eric's point, I think on one of the whereases, I have the MOU that was, you shared it previously, taken, that there is a reference to the Code of Federal Regulations that this is established in. So it's already, I think, documented in the MOU, so that's helpful if folks are interested in looking at that more. Because yeah, it does lay out, every MPO has to have, my understanding, an MOU like this that talks about coordination between them and the state DOT and their RTA and other kind of partner agencies. And the point is to establish sort of grounds for that coordination and expectations on who does what.
And Tegan, I believe one of the large documents that you had sent over with all the other documents is that I think it was what Ken had sent us over about, how MPOs are supposed to operate. And it's, I'll be honest, I didn't get through it all, but it's quite large, and it was sent over with the other documentation that went over last week.
Yeah, so in the original set of materials, the first email we sent where we had links, we did provide a link to the legislation, which Ken actually also brought up and referenced at our first meeting. And it is like, I think Derek captured it pretty well in how he just said it. And we can clip out and like separate out and remind people of that specific language. I think Eric is, well, I know Eric is totally right in that if the MOU were to be sort of revisited as a whole, like I think Eric and Derek have alluded to, there's guidance from the feds where it really does put a lot of deference to the governor and is an agreement, between the governor and the different entities. And so that would elevate, to revisit this as a whole, I think elevates that to a different level and a different kind of conversation, which again, I think this ad hoc committee can discuss and potentially propose. But the way that we have crafted this list of updates, this list of updates does not take it to that level. This list of updates, I think, keeps it at a level where it wouldn't necessarily have to go beyond the board members, the entities within the region. So that's how we've crafted this. We haven't crafted this as something to revisit with the governor.
Yeah.
Is that, I understand Brian's question, but I don't think that's what we've been asked as this committee to do. I think that's a question for Brian to ask the chair if he wants to reopen that whole discussion, as which Tegan has said, that it's only a different level. I don't think that this committee has been asked.
Right. Again, what we can do with this, again, because we're basically going to be going back to the chair with more of, these are some of the processes that we think that the full board should ultimately look into. That could be, and then actually with the bullet point that Tegan brought up, about engaging all MPO municipalities in the early stages, it could fall under that, I would think too. So, as we develop what we want to put forward we could bring that concern up at that point. People agree with that? Okay, great. Just to finish up on the item one, the topics related, topic areas to be updated in the MOU. The rest of the bullet points that Tegan put forward, does anybody have any comments or questions on those? Okay.
Looks good to me.
Tegan, you want to go on to the item number 2?
Great, and thanks for dealing with my scrolling back and forth. I'm going to unhighlight the section now, just because I highlighted it because that was specifically what I thought Brian was bringing up. But before getting into each of the topic areas, I thought it was worthwhile to re-summarize or revisit some of the bigger overarching process questions that you all started to discuss at the last meeting that I think are worth talking about independent of the individual items that are going to be updated. So we already started to talk about that a bit, but a few things that you brought up or that we discussed a bit was a process could be kicked off one way, and then it could then, different topics could be updated in different ways. And one of the things you all started to discuss is there a way to talk about the way structures of MOUs look like across the country? Is there some kind of peer exchange or learning exercise that might be appropriate, either for the full board or for a committee if a committee were established? And if you want to recommend that, you could recommend that be the case, or you could decide that that's not necessarily relevant. And, in discussing the idea of a peer exchange, y'all talked a bit about, the intended audience, what should the forum be? And actually here I referenced the federal regulations again, which states what the MOU is supposed to be. But because of that very vague language of saying it identifies responsibilities in a single agreement, periodically reviewed and updated, there's quite a big variation of how MOUs are structured across the different states in the country. So that's one question. Is there something to gain from a peer exchange or learning activity, either with the feds, with AMPO as the national association, or others? Another topic that you all brought up was around revisiting the fundamental framework of the document, which we just started to talk about. And then again, that engagement piece, engaging municipalities in the early stages along the way, whether that's updates and keeping them informed or something different than that. So those are the three. I thought I'd leave it to you, Tom, to maybe facilitate some conversation about those three topics to see if you all wanted to move towards any more consensus around those three things.
Thanks, Tegan. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So regarding interacting, with other MPOs about their MOUs, I really like the idea of reaching out to other MPOs and understanding how things are done. But given our unique structure, and also, as you mentioned, the MOUs, there's a lot of variation in structures. I think, given that we're sticking with our structure, I would say we probably wouldn't get a whole lot out of understanding how any given MPO's MOU applies to them that we could learn lessons from for us. I just think it's a low probability. And so if we have limited effort, I would direct it otherwise. And certainly, to the extent we would reach out to other MPOs for interaction, it might be to learn other things from them rather than how their MOUs work. That's it. Thank you.
Eric.
Yeah, I don't feel strongly about the necessity to have some type of a forum or discussion or presentation from. If others feel differently, I'm fine with it. But one thing that might be interesting, and I don't know if you guys have already done this, is if we had 3 or 4 examples of MOUs from other MPOs, not in Massachusetts, but across the country, that we could pass around just to look at what are they covering, particularly some of the bigger ones, like like
Chicago.
Yeah, something like that, like ones that we see as sort of peers.
Makes sense.
Yeah, one thing that I've learned in this process is that we are very unique. I think out of all the MPOUs across the country, we're the only one that the state controls. the chair is the chair and things like that, so. And I think when the feds did their review, I think they noted that also. So that was something that, was kind of eye-opening, that, we're that unique, out of the whole country. And, what's the reason for that? I don't know, so, but the other thing too, I think with this, and, I think Eric's suggestion is fine. I think part of this, because I remember this coming up when the feds talked to all of us, when they interviewed us, was that I know when we talked to them, one of the things that we talked about was, and at the time I wasn't thinking of the MOU, but it was just having that peer exchange with other MPOs across the country to find out what's the latest and greatest that they're doing. I know when I was chairman of the Somerville Housing Authority, going to some of the national conferences was where we found out some things that other housing authorities were doing that we never thought of. And one of them was a major project that we did up at the Mystic Ave developments, where we added actually new kitchens and bathrooms and a prefab bump out that was never done before in Massachusetts, and worked out great. So you can learn a lot from, speaking to other people, and it doesn't necessarily mean just on the MOU. And I think, when we were talking to the feds, it was more about just having that overall experience and talking to others to see what they've done and how they've done some things. But yeah, if people are fine with, reaching out to some, large MPOs across the country to see what their sample MOUs look like, people are okay with that, that's fine with me. Okay, Derek.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was recently actually interviewed by a NCHRP panel for coordination with MPOs, and I could check in with them because I think they did a national research project to look at formats of kind of coordination between states and MPOs. So I can reach out to them and see when that might be available, and that might be helpful as well. And then just to speak to the question, the way it's been explained to me in the past, Tom, is your question about like why it's different here is, and this is just how it's been explained to me, but it's, I think it's unique that MassDOT provides the state match for federal transportation dollars. I don't think that's the case in many other states. I think that municipalities are expected to provide matching funds in a lot of other places. And so because of that, and because of all the design criteria we have, and sort of the level of involvement for design that we have here, I think it's partly because of that we have a larger role in the MPO process. So that's my best guess, but I just wanted to throw that out there in case it informs discussion at all here. Thank you.
Sorry, I can't raise my hand. Yeah, sorry, I can't raise my hand for some reason.
I can tell you
controls.
wanted to say something, so.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, Derek, absolutely, I've heard that too. And it is not, I would say, I don't remember the statistics. I think like the federal report, and actually recently AMPO just released a survey that has more information about where the matching funds come from. It is not, I would say it's not common, or no, certainly not like the majority, not even close, where states provide the matching funds. However, there are absolutely other states where those matching funds are provided. And sometimes it's through the format that this state does, which is you find it through state funds. Sometimes it's through other things like toll credits or things that the state can kind of work with the MPOs to set up. So that said, one of the biggest challenges that MPOs across the country through AMPO that I've heard bring up is this challenge of getting the matching funds. It's one of the most common challenge, and that is not a challenge that this MPO faces. So it's there, but I don't think it's like the sole reason for the structure. But to your point as well, Derek, I think there are lots of challenges that MPOs across the country have in terms of working with states to get projects implemented, all of the different design guidance, all those things that you just mentioned. And so a strong working relationship with the state is vital to the success of an MPO regardless, like a very positive, strong working relationship. Whatever the governance structure looks like, that relationship has been identified as really fundamental to the success of the MPOs. And getting the matching funds helps, et cetera. So there are lots of benefits and positives to the relationship with the state. But again, I've heard that is used as an explanation for the governance structure. And my understanding is that we are not the only state with that. And so it's not really like a cause and effect. It may just be a decision to make it work smoothly together. So I think it's a really interesting topic. And I just wanted to bring that in because that's something that's brought up at the AMPO stage quite a lot. And I will say that I think we work better with our state than a lot of other MPOs do, and that's a good thing. We have a lot more touch points and interaction. But as we all know, it's not perfect, and it's never going to be perfect because it can't be.
Right. Yeah. No,
Uh,
that's interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I was just wondering, like, if the structure of the MPO is to some degree a bit of an elephant in the room in terms of like what people are thinking the MOU could update, what the scale of it should be. Like, is that something we would want to like bring to the whole board and get a like sense of before moving forward more as an ad hoc committee? I don't know, just wanted to bring that up because I don't know what the vibe is from people, others on the board about that.
I'm not sure. I know in the past, I know the last time we updated the MOU, it was at that point, it was more just a kind of like a refresh, right? I don't know, Tegan, your thoughts on that as far as like the board's involvement at that point?
I think to get the board's temperature on this, I think it is important to look back to some of the observations and comments made in the federal certification reports. And that doesn't necessarily have to fully reflect where this committee is or where the board is now. But I think that I would suggest, you all look at some of those comments and observations, because I think our federal partners are probably the most in the right position to comment on what they feel about what they're seeing about reactions to the governance structure. And so I think I would look to those references to sort of vet that a bit more.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because that's where, some of the things that the feds came back with, I think came out of those comments. So if we review those, that would help us kind of bring that forward here. Len?
Yeah, and I apologize for the background sound here, but this is a governance conversation, and that is in section 1, and I think it's worth us thinking about seriously, and we can also have conversations about the governance, with the other folks that we bring into the process, like the other municipalities, whether that is at the regional meetings, or whether we're just talking to the representatives, from those regions, that are part of the board. I would advocate for a wider audience, but still, we could have that conversation about how they feel about the governance, with them at those points, and then that can inform us as to whether we move forward later on, maybe as a recommendation of this the MP of this MOU, and deal with changing or at least exploring changing the governance structure at a later point. Also, I think it'd be good to bring the other MPOs in Massachusetts in on that conversation, because I think the MassDOT chairs the board for all of the other MPOs in our state. So I think it'd be good to bring them into the conversation. And as Tegan mentioned, I think this would be elevating the process to a point where we've been bringing in the governor. So maybe that would be step 2 of this process. That's it. Thanks. Once again, I apologize for the background sound.
Tegan?
I found my hand. I'm very excited. Sorry. I think I really appreciate that you all are having this conversation. Again, I've seen things written about it. I think it's important that you all decide if you want to have the conversation. One thing I wanted to add to it is that I put in the chat something that AMPO likes to say, which is that if you know one MPO, you know one MPO. And that, anything we say is unique about us. Every MPO has got something unique about the way that they're structured or they work. And I think one of the really valuable things for me to go to AMPO and to talk to other MPOs to understand is that there are pros and cons to every governance structure, to every strategy of getting matching funds, of everything we do, there are pros and cons. And I think that's why some of this like kind of peer exchange or learning from other MPOs kind of keeps coming back up, is that it's not to say that, another MPO will teach us what the best way is to write up an MOU, but it might kind of open up some of those conversations and help this board think through pros and cons of how you work and where there may or may not be things that you might want to change. So I just wanted to throw that out there from the perspective of the thought process that you all are talking about right now, if you want to think through it. I appreciate also that Len brought up, the other MPOs in the state as well. I've been trying to make sure that I'm also building that relationship. And again, I know our state, like Derek and other liaisons, have been working very closely with all of the MPOs in the state. And so there's a broad perspective there as well.
Okay, anybody else on this? All right, we're just gonna go to the next bullet point, was establish the fundamental framework for the document. Confirm the intent in the primary audience. We've kind of kicked that around somewhat, and then establish expectations around the content to be included in this document, in the outline format. Anybody have any, comments on those? Okay. Then the last the next bullet is engaging all the MPOs in the early stages of MOU redevelopment, send updates. So again, we just talked about that a little bit, is engaging them all. Again, it's who's the audience, the seat holders, designees, and alternates. And then what's the balance of focus of the scale of building awareness and soliciting specific input. Is there anything there you want to expand on, Tegan, on that section?
I mean, I think we've been talked about this in a variety of ways. I do think that this committee, I hope can formulate kind of where you stand on these items, about what you might recommend in terms of for example, if you do think that other municipalities in the region should be engaged. I don't think this committee has to dictate exactly how, but I think it'd be important for you all to express your opinion one way or the other on these and the other items in this section.
That's a good point. It's like, how would we even go about? I'm just wondering how much like municipalities are going to really want to dig into this.
Very little.
That's what I'm thinking.
I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that
That's my thoughts.
we're not,
Can't even get to the phone.
yeah.
What makes you think they're gonna give you feedback?
Yes.
I think there will be some that will be interested, and I think that, I think ultimately, just given that we're not talking about somehow radically changing, throwing out exactly what we have, we're talking about tweaking around the edges. I don't think the vast majority of our municipalities will be that focused on this, but I do think we should give people an opportunity. I think we should send it out. We should do a public comment period.
Yep.
We should do all of the things that we would normally do for soliciting input from cities and towns.
Yep. No, I agree. I think that's going to be.
I don't think anything special like the regular.
Yeah. And when you really look at what we're looking at, I think the biggest, the hot item on this was the same hot item we had the last time we did this, is the role of the RTAs. That's probably the biggest single issue that we have in here. But Len, I see your hand up.
It's some a little quieter space right now. So I guess it's gonna be, take around the edges. It may expand out. I think the one way to guarantee that it does only a little is to involve fewer people. I think this is an opportunity for us to do outreach to all the municipalities. Engage them in this. Find out. Really, are they happy with the governance structure? Would they like to see something different? And I know it's a big lift. I think we would first go to the folks that have been voted by the various regions, sub-regions, and say, hey, you're on the board. we need you to do this. If for whatever reason they can't do it, then maybe the advisory council can take that on, with staff. But I think this is a really good opportunity to reach out to all the municipalities and just let them know, you're part of this MPO. We want input from you. That's a thank you.
Okay, anyone else? So basically, I think, what I'm hearing is we do think it's gonna be probably limited engagement, but, we do definitely want to reach, reach out, ask for opinions, things like that. And then as far as, now, when you get into on this, you have who is the audience, seat holders, designees, and alternates. Are you basically talking about their tagging on the MPO board?
Yeah,
Doing
I'm sorry,
that?
this is somewhat note-taking from the last meeting. I think a couple different times the audience of this got brought up in the last meeting. I do think that while the way that the document is structured is not going to be for any, member of the public to get engaged in the MPO, it really is an agreement, and it needs to be an agreement, per the federal requirements. But I guess the question is the audience of this document really the people who already hold the seats, or is it all of the municipalities in the region, or is there sort of a broader, reaching out that this would be intended to accomplish? What I'm hearing, and which I don't disagree with at all, is that maybe that there is a primary audience of making sure this gets to all the municipalities, but that's probably where the buck stops in terms of this particular document and engaging people in this document. And that was just kind of the question we wanted to hone in on with you guys.
Okay, I think to me, the main audience is the full board. And obviously we want it, because the board is the one that's going to be, working with the MOU and, dealing with the issues. I agree, though, that we should, reach out to other municipalities, see what comes back from them. But I think our main audience is the actual MPO board. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
Just add one thing,
Yeah.
like I agree, broadly, I do think there might be, to the degree that we can make the text of the MOU kind of understandable to someone who does wanna kind of get a sense of what the heck this board is, and how, I think that would be helpful,
Some more in the introductory text, of the kind of a better explanation of
yeah, or just, even simple things of trying to take out some of the verbiage that is less essential to the kind of main point of the document and move it either, as we've discussed, to the operating agreement
Right.
or in footnotes or other ways of just making the document
a little
bit user friendly to, I think, everyone, including the board and also
Yep.
anyone else trying to dig into this.
Well, I know a lot of it, in the MOU, there's a lot of information about the tip, and I know a lot of that is moved into the operations plan now, so part of this is kind of cleaning up the MOU to make it a little bit more simple. Let's see. I think we talked about the last bullet, balance of focus on the scale and building awareness. Again, I think it's just sending it out to the wider audience, which is all the municipalities in the area, to see what kind of input we get from them. People agree with that? Okay. And then the last bullet is, what form, should this engagement take? Email, surveys, sub-regional meetings. I'm gonna pick on you now. On that, do you think that's just we ask in a survey format, Eric, or, because I know
What is
you
the
guys.
question?
Basically, this is going back on what kind of engagement,
Yeah, we can bring this to the subregions.
Right, yeah, okay. And would you do it through, basically the question here is, and I think we brought it up at the last meeting, is it through a survey, sub-regional meetings, or emails? Any thoughts on?
You could do a combination of those things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that, I think a survey is good. I think that you can get some real, quantitative data from a survey. Problem is not everyone will take the survey.
Right.
And so if you can go to the sub-regions, you could also get some qualitative data,
Yeah.
from the sub-regional media, so you can kind of have both things.
Taken on a survey, like what would staff need? Because you'd have to kind of hone in on certain things, right?
Yeah, that's a big question, and I think needs to be delved into a bit further. So
Right.
I definitely agree with Eric. I think that a variety of ways to try to get input is important. Also, because certain staff attend sub-regional meetings, which might be different staff than we might also want to engage in this topic. And so I would suggest that, a survey has to be thoughtful. What is the survey? Is the survey just saying, here's the document, give us some input? I don't think that's useful. So the survey should be focused on asking a couple, I think, of pointed questions to get the temperature of municipalities in the region to maybe respond to some of these key topic areas that are up at the top here. But that needs a lot of thought before I think we've honed it down to what a good survey could look like.
Thank you. Do you want to go on to the next section, Tegan?
Absolutely. So what I'll say here is we've drafted a sort of format here that you may or may not decide that you like as a way to think about offering these recommendations to the board. If you like this format, great. If you don't, great. Please just let me know kind of what you think makes sense. So we took each kind of topic area grouping. So in this case, the biggest one is the staff recommended content, or the content that would really be driven by a staff process to make the updates. Gave a little bit of context about that, and then kind of listed out the different topic areas. So again, the 3C process, voting rules, geographic demographic equity, revising the tip section, and then a new review cycle and process. And then below that is just a very simple framework that can outline the process that you would recommend going through to address these particular updates. So this is just a start. Again, there's question marks. It doesn't need to look like this. You could have 20 steps. You could have 2 steps. But the idea being that you could say, well, in this case, staff would take a look at and review and draft changes first, and then bring them to, and this is where we have the usual question, to the board, to a committee, where do you want staff to bring those recommendations? They would then get, recommended edits and changes, and then there would be maybe an additional review, but in the end, a final sort of board approval. So again, this is not saying this is the right process. This is just starting to give you something to react to in terms of setting up the framework for a process. And as I think Tom mentioned earlier, one of the repeated questions that you'll see throughout each of these sections is, is this going to a committee? Is it going to the full board? If it's going to the full board, kind of what does that look like in terms of, is it a couple of different board meetings like we did with the operations plan where it's discussed, or what? So for the staff-driven process, I wanted to pause here and open up on people's thoughts about whether you have feelings about how this should unfold. But I do think that it will be driven by whether you decide that you want to recommend that there be a committee addressing these issues or something else.
Comments from anyone on this? John?
I'll go back to, my overall thought at the beginning. I think these, these type of changes and reviews, I think the committee, the ad hoc committee, and maybe if the chair feels a few more members, if we're gonna be reviewing these type of things, I think it should be, to streamline, and it should be brought back to committee level, reviewed, and then sent to the full board for to be fully vetted. I think trying to go through all of these types of changes in front of the full board is more difficult. I think it would be streamlined and easier for everybody.
Jen?
I agree with the kind of committee recommendation. One thing I wonder just is whether after staff drafts these track changes, could that draft be sent to the entire board so that if people did want to look at it and suggest things, then they could send it to staff and the board so we could review that. But I think a smaller number of people kind of debating it would be helpful, but maybe if people could have the opportunity to at least see what staff suggested. And
Definitely.
yeah,
That's good.
Yeah.
I like that.
Len?
Yeah, I mean, I'm agreeing with the committee structure. I think partly because it seemed to work well for the operations plan. I mean, with respect to Jen's idea, I like it. Wonder about the OML implications, open meeting law implications of that. If it passes muster with OML laws, then open meeting law, and I'm fine with it. And I think we had multiple touch points with the full committee when developing the operations plan, so I kind of like that model. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Tegan, do you have enough on that to move forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think if we leave this meeting with consensus of this group that there will be some kind of subcommittee established, then we'll be able to filter that into all of these structures and then probably present you back a draft that has that built in. So that would make sense. I see somebody has their hand up if you want to call.
Yeah,
him,
I
Tom.
don't know who iPhone 2 is.
Dennis.
Yeah, sorry,
Oh,
it's Dennis,
Dennis.
sorry. I just wanted to comment on the committee versus board. I prefer a committee too. I think John's right. To delegate it to a committee, but I think one of the things that made the operations plan, and maybe in this case here, would be that we periodically review some of the things as we're going along, so that if we're off target, there's a discussion about the board, so we can come back to us as opposed to doing it at the end, right? So we can give them frequent updates of how we're doing, and then get their input, just to measure if we're on target or not off target.
So Dennis, that would probably be once we made the decision to ask for a committee to be formed.
Yes, absolutely correct. Yes, yeah, that was my agreement with John. I think he's right with the committee format, right? Yep.
Okay.
I agree 100% with Dennis. Good, that's a good point, Dennis.
Okay. Tegan, you want to go on to the next? The
Sure.
FTA role.
So just for your, just to support you all, I know like when we had the conversation at the last meeting, there were questions into the history of the topic of the RTA decision making. So one of the things we tried to do for this document for you is to put a little of that history and context in writing, so it's easy for you to glance back at and refresh yourself as to why this came up in the past. So this isn't all the context you would need to make a decision, but it's a context that I think puts the recommendation in its historical context. So that's what this context is. It just talks about the past recommendations and the past conversations that we had about RTA decision making. But in the end, what our federal partners have done is say, come back to this topic. We need you to address in a way you have not yet before the roles of the RTAs in decision making. So for this process, again, just starting to draft up something for you to respond to, I think that this process involves an early action step, which is to convene with the RTA representatives to sit down again and potentially together, potentially independently, but just to sort of really vet what each RTA themselves would find satisfactory in terms of representation on the board, because that was the way that the feds brought it up, that it should be satisfactory to all parties. And then that there's a way that discussion could be brought back to a committee, again, or the full board. An alternative is that the committee could ask, CADA and MWRTA to come to a committee meeting to discuss this topic and discuss what their interests were. So there's a couple different ways to approach it. And that was a question to this group, is that, do you have any preference, in terms of how that would unfold? Do you want to just say it should go to a committee and the committee should decide whether they want the RTA members to come to them individually, or if staff should just reach out to the RTA representatives? So that was a couple questions built up into one, but those are the questions. The other question I put down here for your consideration is, staff did do research back in 2019 about what RTA representation looks like across different MPOs. There's also the federal report that Ken referenced that has that kind of information. We could bring that research back, or you could decide it doesn't matter, because what we're being asked to do now is to just decide what works for these RTAs and this board. And so that's another question for you all to consider.
I agree with that last piece.
Yeah,
I
I
don't think it matters. I think
Yeah.
we just have to decide what we're doing for this board.
So I think Dennis.
Thanks. I do think I'd like to see the committee engage the RTA, so we hear directly from them, what their thinking is, and what. So that'll be my preference to do it at one of our committee meetings.
So So that would be the ad hoc committee meeting.
I think it can't, I think it would be the further committee meeting, because the ad hoc
Okay.
committee is only meeting 3 times.
Oh, that's
If
right.
that makes sense, Tom?
Yep.
Yeah,
no,
it would
that's
be
right.
if we go to a
If we
committee
go to a
structure.
Yeah, because I know in the last time there was a transit working group that was put together, but I don't think it really went anywhere. And I think it kind of hit with COVID hitting and, so I think it kind of fell apart, didn't it, Tegan?
Well, I would like to say
just-
that we do hope to reinitiate. I don't think it went on hiatus, but there's a strong interest in it, and we would strongly like to continue it. And we're getting, I think, Annette, correct me if I'm wrong, but we got feedback recently from a survey that there's interest in continuing it, but it's not going to address this topic, is the point. So I would treat them as totally separately.
Do either of the RTAs participate in that?
Yes,
They do.
yes, they did.
Both of them.
More MWRTA than CADA.
That's not gonna solve whether we give them a seat.
What's that?
No,
That's not gonna solve whether we give them a seat.
No.
No, that was the original plan, but then that failed, but we decided that transit working group was still a good thing to do, and so we continued it. And in fact, we have a meeting coming up, I believe in October.
But back then it was, when we did this the last time, we had asked the staff to, talk to them about this. And it never really went anywhere on that. So on that, it looks like, once, if the chair decides to have a committee, we would ask the RTAs to come in and explain what their thought process would be on them serving on the board. Dennis?
Maybe his hand's just still up.
Yeah. Derek?
Thank you, Chair. I was just gonna ask a question. So I know MWRTA has been pretty vocal in their request for a voting seat on the board. But CADA, I know not so much. I mean, like, just to cut to one of the options, right, is like almost like a rotating or like a one seat for both of them, I guess, right? Like that there's like a regional transit seat, right? Like, would it make sense at any point to have them in the same room to talk about like both CADA and MWRTA, or like to have some kind of coordination with both of them at the same time, or like on those options? Just curious on that.
Well, I mean, you would think that, oh,
I can tell you what happened in the past. But
okay, I mean, you would, just thinking about it, you would think that the two RTA, they'd get together themselves to kind of put together a front as far as what they want, right? I mean, that's what I would think would happen, but do you want to talk about what?
Yeah, so originally in the past, it was pretty much MWRTA taking the lead in this effort, and CADA going along and saying we were happy with MWRTA representing RTAs on the board. So given that the CADA has limited staffing, we even have a hard time reaching them for other issues. So I doubt that they are actually interested in sitting at the table, but I can't speak for them at this point in time because staff has changed there, staff has changed at MWRTA. I do think we should engage both of them. My expectation is that it is really MWRTA driving this, and MWRTA that would sit at the table, should they get a seat.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
John?
And just for not knowing maybe what I should know, but
I wanna see that.
MWRTA is bigger.
Yeah.
It's bigger, right? Yes. That's what I thought, right? So that's probably why.
Why the question? Len, and then
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm almost I guess as much as I want to have this discussion, I think maybe we're getting a little bit ahead. And I Derek's idea has appealed to me. The burning question I have is, has the board as a whole decided, not to give me a seat to MWRTA or the RTAs being on the board? It's just never been clear to me, where that decision point, where it's been and really where it's taken place. But that said, I guess maybe this is something to decide, for the committee to decide later on, and that's it. Thanks.
I mean, I think when the thought, because this, you know, we, the board voted on this the last time we updated the MOU, and that's when, you know, basically it came back not to add them. But then the feds, you know, keep bringing it up. So, so I think the thought process is, what I'd be interested in is hearing from them to understand what they think that their role would be, and, you know, what is their interest be, you know?
I agree.
And according to the feds, it's really about getting something mutually agreeable.
Right.
So that's
So
what
we
we
have-
have to work
Yeah.
towards, right? I don't think we came away with
Right.
that last time.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I feel like if they say, you know, we just want to have more say over the, you know, the federal, you know, transportation fund, or the federal transit funds, then I feel like, okay, well, we can accommodate that through the working group meeting. But if they want to be engaged in all the issues that the MPO deals with across the region and bringing an RTA perspective to that, then I would be much more inclined to say, okay, great. We could, you know, but you have to be a participant, and you have to actually show up at all the meetings.
Well,
You have to agree to be on subcommittees, like you're gonna have to devote some time to the MPO.
this is what,
You can't just show up at tip season
right,
and be like, oh,
Advocate for-
I'm gonna advocate for projects that are in my geography. I think if that's sort of what they wanna do, then I don't think that's appropriate then.
and that's kind of, it's, if I'm wrong, tell me, all right, but that's what I kind of remember from our discussion a few years ago. Was, you know, what, basically, there's only really one time a year when we're really talking about, you know, a lot of this that would interest them. You know, and are they gonna want to show up at other things, you know? So if we're talking about, you know, a complete streets project in Cambridge or something, is that really something that they're interested in? I don't know, you know, so I think part of that would be asking for them to come to us and tell us why. You know, what can you bring to the table? Why do you want us? Why do you want to have that? So I think that's one way to at least get to the bottom of it. But if it's all about funding, you know, for them, then that might take it, like you say, the transit working group, and they can bring it back to us that way. Jen?
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Okay.
And I think, yeah, questions from us to them about what they're looking for, and also us trying to understand, like, getting real answers on their capacity to, and like the degree of staff time they have to devote to this.
Yeah. Great. Right. Tegan, you good on that one now?
So far, so good. We'll bring
Okay.
this back again. Okay, so the next one is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council. Again, we started to talk about this earlier. If there is a committee, again, I think we could structure a set of steps that would involve, and to people's earlier point, there could be draft shared with the board as a whole for feedback potentially, but then the committee would discuss and finalize the recommendation. Right now, this is, again, pretty generic, something to react to. It's basically that staff, you know, engages the advisory council in some way, that staff and the chair probably confirm what they want to bring to the board, the chair of the advisory council. Confirm what they want to bring to the board, you know, and that those are then shared with the committee and then approved or not approved from there. And so the same question here is around, is there a committee, is the full board, et cetera. So I think we've already kind of said that we would bring a committee into each of these structures. So we can discuss this more, or we can come back next time with another format that has that kind of structure in place. But I'm happy to discuss it more if you all would like.
Anybody, any comments on that? Oh, all right, I think we're good on that one.
Great. So now you start to see like blank tables, just because it gets tiresome to put like question marks in all of the lines. The next topic is the committee governance. So this came up last time, and I would say it wasn't something I think that we had highlighted before starting this ad hoc committee, because we did in the operations plan conversations talk about putting together a description of the committees and a process for appointing the members of the committees and appointing the chair of the committees. So we did a lot of the legwork, I think, in the operations plan discussion to talk about how committees are formed and how the chairs get assigned. What we didn't do was talk about, is there some kind of governance like rules that you want to set? Like, for example, the chair, the vice chair. So for example, for the MPO, the chair is the state, that's a rule. And the rule for the vice chair is that it needs to be, I'm forgetting whether it's only a regional entity or whether it's a regional entity or a municipality, but it has a constraint, right? And the purpose is the balance of having a vice chair that's not necessarily a state seat. So they're not both state seats, but that there's some diversity there. So I think last time you all said something about considering diversity in committee governance. And so I put this in here, but I don't have yet kind of a sense of process, or if there's real consensus within this ad hoc committee that you want to make sure that this is part of the future committees. I'll just call it that, the future committees discussion. So I'll leave it to you. Yeah.
I just don't think this is an MOU issue. I think this is an operations plan issue.
I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the operation plan, or it might be a federal thing that I'm confusing because I've read so much on this, that the MPO board is supposed to pick the vice chair.
Yes,
Am I
so the
correct?
board picks the vice chair.
That's not what's happening now, I don't believe.
Yeah.
It will happen on the
Well, then
30th.
I can remember.
There will be.
You've been on it, you've been vice chair forever, so I don't remember.
There'll be a thing in November. For people.
Okay, so, okay, all right.
There is a nomination and a vote.
Yeah.
Is there, yeah, like,
We like Eric so much.
yeah, he just
Vote him
keeps
back
getting
in,
it,
but
he
it's a
does a
vote.
great job, you know?
Yeah, but it is a vote.
But, so Eric, again, you think it's more of a operation plan than an MOU piece?
I mean, I think the MOU should say something like there will be, there'll be committees that will be decided upon by the will of the board. And I think we've spent a lot of time in the operations plan identifying sort of how that can go about happening. I just feel like, I don't know, to me, like committee governance issues, like kind of,
Could be an operation.
I just think like the MOU, I just think the MOU is a higher level document, and this, I don't know, this feels like you're starting to get too in the weeds now.
I agree. I mean, we have a whole section on it, but that's like an operations. Plan.
Yeah.
Right.
That's exactly what you should be.
Anybody else on that?
Just trying to remember the context that this came up. Was it Brad who brought this up?
I'm not sure, yeah.
Uh,
So it
I
sounds
know-
like, what I'm hearing is that, that it's more in the operations, in that we should have some reference in the MOU to the operations plan about this.
No, I think that makes sense. I will say that whatever the topic, whoever brought it up last time, it had not been addressed in the operations plan, which is fine. The operations plan does not put any restrictions on who could be a chair of a committee, which is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the comment that was brought up last time was about talking about that topic. And then so maybe it was Brad, since nobody else in the room remembers, Jen. That's my guess, but I'm fine with striking this from the MOU conversation. I have no issue with that.
And maybe to like flag it for future
Mhm.
operations plan.
I
update.
unfortunately have a 2:00 I have to
All right.
do, but good progress.
All
Thank you.
right, thanks, sir.
Yeah, Jen, I have a section, I have a place where I'm flagging future operations plan items as they come up, just for consideration, so I can add it to the Asana page that we have to flag those future topics.
Okay. Next item was the update, to reference to the fiduciary agent agreement.
May I suggest we skip this one for now? I mean, just given time, what I think I can do is go back to staff who are working on the fiduciary agent agreement and kind of recommend, I think, again, it would come to the committee, et cetera, but we can kind of vet this out internally as to what the steps might look like.
Right, and we are basically already working on that with MAPC already, so that makes sense to come back later on. And then the next item, define description of agency collaboration.
Yeah, so this one I think is a little, it's a little tricky, not that other ones aren't. But the idea here is that there's a couple of comments there's a couple of parts of the MOU that talk about how agencies should collaborate. And I think as typical in an MOU, it kind of says you shall collaborate, but it doesn't necessarily explain kind of how. And not only that, there are some references to how the collaboration should take place in terms of the TIP process that needs to be aligned with the operations plan. So this is kind of a maybe it could be a simple topic. It could be that the board is fine with just having in the MOU, you shall collaborate. It could be that you all as a board want to work together a bit more with the agencies to decide what these collaboration pieces look like. So for example, right now, in terms of collaboration between the PMT, which is the MBTA's long range plan, which I think OTP, if I'm not mistaken, might be taking the lead on starting up again soon. The capital investment program, which is presented to the MPO board, I think maybe once a year. Those are intended to be coordinated with the TIP and the long range plan. And again, I don't have a specific recommendation here as staff at all. I think it's really up to the board to say, do you want to dig into a little more about a definition of what this coordination looks like? Or is the way it happens now, which is a presentation once a year? I don't know what the last PMT coordination looked like. It was a while ago, and that was Focus 40. So I don't know if it was presentations to the board or if the board was engaged more deeply in that process. But this is another topic that could be further elaborated in the MOU, or you could decide that it doesn't need to be addressed, except for just maybe making sure that it's consistent with the operations plan.
Anybody have any comments on that? So Tay, I don't know if you staff wants to come back with any kind of recommendation on it.
I mean, we can. I think it would be helpful to get a sense for whether you all would recommend that this be discussed further, or if you feel satisfied with the way that it's explained now, which again is that very simple, like you shall collaborate. And
I mean, I think the only problem with you shall collaborate, that's fine with me, but the problem is if we go veer off of that, it's like, okay, now how are we going to define what that means? Could that get really kind of difficult? I'm not sure. Len?
Well, it could get difficult, but I mean, someone has to be given responsibility for doing it. So I would say if we did send this off, and say it's a planning, an operations, thing, that we make sure that it gets done, that it gets, because it does need detail, and I think it needs detail and some kind of enforcement, soft enforcement, mechanism, on the board, either the board incorporates it into some kind of schedule, or we request that staff keep us on the ball on it. But I don't think it's enough to simply say, that we want collaboration, or that is a goal, that we need to make it happen in some way. That's it. Thank you.
All right, Kagan, thoughts? Well, I guess it would have to go, you know what, I'm gonna let Derek jump in.
Yeah. Sure, yeah, thank you. I was just gonna say I think we do a lot of coordination regularly, and it might not be explicitly spelled out in the MOU. So if it would be helpful, we could talk a little bit in the MOU. I think it might reference the annual MARPA meeting, but we could get into a little more detail, since I think we've been doing a lot more since this was written in 2011, thinking about our readiness days and just our those priority of projects meetings that I know Ethan attends. And I think there is pretty regular coordination that we could probably put into writing, and then if maybe that's a draft, and then if folks want more than that, or additional things that might be missing, then that might be just something to put down, and then folks can react to it. But I just wanted to throw that out there as a potential option. Thanks.
If
Derek,
I could ask,
you're kind of laying out what that expectation is, and how that's what it sounds like. So we're kind of stating, okay, these are the areas that we need collaboration on, and this is what we expect. Tegan?
yes, I was gonna say, if I could ask, I think that's useful for all of us to do, for sure. I might ask it could be discussed as part of the MOU update, but it might be language that doesn't end up getting written into the MOU because it might be more specific and maybe things that we then set aside to flag to amend into the operations plan.
Yep.
Frankly, I would expect that the operations plan will need an update parallel to the update of the MOU anyway, because there'll be other kinds of tweaks that might be necessary as a result. So that might be a nice parallel process to think about what that language might inform the MOU, but that language might go into the operations plan, perhaps.
Mhm.
Great, anybody else? All right. Last but not least, establish expectation for board member development.
Yeah, I think this is another one that deserves conversation. This one, I think, should be, it's a little more like inward looking, like what are the board members looking to gain out of maybe these processes. And it's inward looking in terms of what are your interests in terms of professional development on the board. It's, however, a little more external looking in the sense that any of those efforts do need, funding associated with them. So there's a couple of different ways to think about that. And that needs to be, I think, discussed. It may be discussed only at the Boston region level. However, if there's an interest in establishing more board related coordination with MPOs across the state, that actually could be something that some states, the MPOs agree to pull some money off the top of PL funding to be able to organize something like an annual conference. But that would affect funding for all of the MPOs in the state, and it's a much bigger question. The other way this could be thought about is that, MassDOT's recently come to MARPA and to TMG to talk about there being a pool of unused PL funds. And it could be something that's looked at as a use of unused PL funds over time. So that means if the PL funds aren't all spent in a year, they accrue, they could be used towards these kinds of initiatives as like a boost to the professional development of the board members, perhaps. So those discussions, I think, need to happen. I don't think this ad hoc committee needs to decide those things, but it's kind of like laying out some of the questions around this and ask you all and your kind of fixation on, or your commitment to making sure that this is a topic that's discussed or not.
Any comments on that? Anyone? I mean, my thoughts here is, again, this would be something we would move to, a committee if it does get approved or to the board. But again, it was more, and, we've had some discussions about this. It was, having that coordination, not only, with MPOs across the country, but just MPOs in our state, to talk about some of the different issues. So I don't think on that end, Tegan, I don't think the ad hoc committee, other than maybe moving that forward, I don't think we need to do too much on that. Okay. I think that's it, right?
Yes, it is. I know we had until 2:30. I'm sure everyone will be very happy to end a little bit early. I could make a suggestion for what we could come back to you with at the next meeting, unless you'd like to make your own suggestions, Tom.
No, why don't you go ahead?
I was thinking what we could do is revise this document to reflect the intent to have an actual ongoing committee, a future committee established. What I might do is actually flip the order, or at least we could agree to talk through the items in the opposite order next time, if that makes sense. But at least updating this document with an assumption that one of the overarching recommendations is get a standing committee going, and then start to build out this framework with the assumption of that standing committee. And then my question to you all is that something you want us to use this framework to begin to develop into what your recommendation is to the board? Or would you like to, do it differently, Tom? It's up to you all.
Any comments on that?
I
You
think
agree?
that's right, yeah.
John agrees. We all good? I think we're all good with that.
Well, I agree. I guess the
I'm
question
sorry,
is-
I didn't
yeah.
see your hand up.
No problem, Tom. I can act as if I'm in the room. That's okay. I find my quiet place and then just inject myself in. So I guess the question then is do we determine how long that committee runs, Tegan? And any structure for the committee and our recommendations to the chair about the committee. I think we should. I always hesitate, and one of the things I didn't say earlier on was like I hate kind of speaking for a committee that hasn't been created. You do want to put some framework, or some, you want to give it some guidance, and a purpose, but sometimes kind of telling the committee this is what you're going to do, strikes me as a little premature sometimes, but at the same time, it's like a chicken egg situation. Anyways, what I'm getting back to is how much do we want to spell out? How much do we want to define committee in terms of how long it runs, and maybe its composition, or do we just leave that completely open, to the chair, who then says, look, we're going to have X number of members, and you all have at it. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
What do you,
Taking,
what do you all think?
what's that?
What do you all think? I mean, I think that is up to you all.
Comments from anyone?
I agree with the general sentiment that it might be useful for us to think about that question, at least like a sense of what the timeline might be.
Well, on the timeline, I was gonna ask, does the chair, has David put anything forward as to like when he would like to see this? No, okay. So,
Mr. Chair,
go ahead,
is there
John.
any requirement from the
From the
feds when
feds.
we need to get back to them? Or, I mean, that would be the timeline.
We only had a deadline put on the what is it called? The required action, Annette, which was to update a specific tip language. So there's no deadline on the rest of this work. However, I would say is if it hasn't even started by the time the next federal certification review begins, that looks pretty bad. Could you have it complete well before the next federal certification review? That would probably be great. So,
is
you know,
3.5 years.
We get 3.5 years?
Yeah.
the next one will probably start in 3 years. I would suggest you try to do it faster than 3 years because that's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
3 year, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, no, we don't want it to drag on forever, obviously. Yeah, again, maybe we have to go back to the chair to see, if he would, like to corral us on that. I mean, I think
Maybe-
though, this.
I think we can try.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Tom. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think we can give a ballpark. So I think as we go through this, and maybe I'll ask staff to do this through you, Mr. Chair. And as we determine what it is we want to do, then we kind of look at the calendar, and just kind of figure out, okay, this is when we can fit it in, and then project, as to when we can fit it, we can complete it. Because if we do want to have regional meetings, that will take time. And there are things that are going on an annual basis that we know we have to do, and we just fit it in around the things that we have to do, and then we get to either summer of next year or fall of next year, or maybe we find ourselves being edged into 25, but we can at least give a ballpark. That's it. Thanks.
I have a suggestion, which is to consider the continuation of the annual meeting. Now, the annual meeting marks when new board members might be present. So you could decide whether or not that's the best meeting to try to approve a new MOU, but it's when the secretary is invited to preside. The acting secretary has in a preliminary way agreed to attend this year's annual meeting. You could consider that as a kind of a marker of some kind, either to make the recommendations or consider approving them. Just throwing that out there as that being an important meeting for the board going forward.
Okay. Anybody on that? Just kind of getting back to a little bit about, setting up a framework for a committee. My guess is, my thought would be that a lot of us that are on this committee will probably be on that committee. So I think, if I was a new member coming into that committee, I would be glad that the ad hoc committees kind of set the ground, set the table for us, so that they don't have to go through a lot of the stuff that we're going through now. And then as far as the timeline piece goes, Tegan, I hate committees that go on forever. So I would want to see, I guess I'm going to rely back on you on this, staff, because a lot of this will be what your schedule is, because a lot of it is information that you have to get to us. So I don't want to put some artificial timeline on it and then just put more added pressure on staff to get something done. Without looking at your full calendar as to, all the other things that you need to do, so. And then the chair, again, we would have to have a discussion, I think, with the chair to see if he has any, concerns about like when this would get done. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We as staff can work together as we're drafting up a new version of this with the committee structure in mind. We can think about our own schedule, and I think it is worthwhile vetting your recommendation with the chair with either through Derek. I know you're at these meetings as the liaison, but we should make sure that that's somewhat vetted before we bring it to the full board. So we're not proposing something that is completely out of line with what, our chair can accommodate or do.
Great.
Mr. Chair.
John?
So this committee, what are we, 5 members?
What's the total membership of this?
I think it's 8. Yeah.
I could be off by one day. I
Yeah,
think
I
it's
mean, just on, from the, the last ad hoc committee, like, it's like around a good number. I mean,
Yeah.
too many, it gets too
big.
too big, and it's hard to accomplish things. And then just, like honestly, I enjoy these committees. I really like being on them. I think we accomplish a lot, and they're good. So, for some, if I'm lucky enough to be able to be on the next round of this, I'd love to be, right? But, so speaking selfishly from my own schedule, right? It's hard to meet more than once a month when it's a 2-hour meeting, which we seem to need for these type of things. And knowing that in the middle of this, right, you're gonna have a time for the tip and all of that. So it almost seems like something like this is gonna be 9 months to a year. Right, so knowing that we might even have to take a break for a couple of months with the tip.
While the other things are going on.
Right, while the other things are going on, so that's the type of time frame I'm thinking in my head. It might be a year, and there may be a period where you're not meeting for a month or 2, or it might be 6 weeks in between a meeting or something like that. So, I mean, that's the type of time frame. It might even be 15 months, because of that. So I wouldn't think that would be unreasonable to accomplish something as in-depth as this, to do it right anyway. No one would, as Dennis had said, checking back a couple of times in between with the board.
Right, just to make sure we're on track.
To make sure we're on track, counting like, maybe a couple of check-ins. Seems like that.
Sure. No, I think that's reasonable.
No summer vacation for you, John. You're good.
I also, I don't want to discourage anyone, but I do want to remind everyone that we have there's a new committee also that the operations plan team, the ANF committee, was very excited to recommend establishing, which is around the TIP process. So like kind of the deeper dive into the TIP process. So we'll also have committee members who will be, or board members who will be interested in being on that committee. And that committee will probably be, like many things, a little more intensified during that TIP timeframe. So I think that's good to be sensitive to the kind of the ebb and flow of the work, that it'll be very TIP intensive for a little while.
Did
You
you
can think about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to think about in setting a time frame for a committee. I think we should define what the goal of that committee is. So is the goal of that committee to have a final draft MOU? Or is it to have an approved MOU? Like that, I think we need to confine what we're asking that committee to do.
I mean, my thought would be is that we would have a draft MOU for the board then to approve. Does that make sense? So ultimately, that's where I think we would want to go.
Right.
And then, then when it gets to the board level, depending on, hopefully if that future committee is keeping the board up to date, like we've talked about, with different issues or questions that we may want to get out to them. Hopefully at that point, then when we submit a draft, a lot of the heavy lifting will be done. And the board, at that point may not have to spend a lot of time on it. I think that would be my goal, right?
I think that's the goal.
Yeah, so that the last step would be
approval, which was what's happened on other things that we've done in the past.
Exactly.
Tegan, you okay with that?
Yep. Absolutely.
All right, great. No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say before we Greg, we should, one, confirm Jen is good with providing the update to the board tomorrow, and two, we should talk about the next meeting. I think both of those are worth just quickly discussing.
Yep, Jen's good with it.
Jen, do you want us to feed you anything, or do you feel you're all ready to go?
I guess, I've got a decent sense, but I don't know, is it like maybe we can,
Some bullet points.
some bullet points may be helpful just in terms of what you think would be useful to share or not to share.
Sure.
I mean, if there was anything.
And thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
All right, any other items come before the ad hoc committee?
Next meeting?
Oh, next meeting, we have a date, we don't have a date for that, right? When do you think? Because a lot of it will depend on what staff comes
So-
back.
This should be the last meeting that you have, I think, unless you want to hold any more, so maybe we should leave space for that. And the idea is that you bring recommendations to the November 30th annual meeting. So it could happen in October. It could even happen at the end of October and still have space for you all to meet again if you decided you really needed to before the annual meeting. But I would recommend, late October. And Annette, I don't know if you can, I know we have an MPO meeting on the 19th and a tip process engagement and readiness committee meeting, it looks like, at least potentially on the 19th. So I would suggest maybe the following week, the last week in October, or the week of the 30th.
The 25th would work for me pretty well,
Yeah, 25th looks good for me. How's that?
We could also pull the full set of members if just to make sure.
Sure.
But yeah, if it's easier to, again, you could send out a poll.
Well, if it looks like the Wednesday works for most
There's
of these
other members
folks,
that aren't here right now too, so.
yeah, we can just check the one date if it works
Yeah.
for most folks.
Okay.
And if it works we'll double check that it works for staff. And then do you want a longer hold like this again, like a 2-hour hold? Or do you think it should be shorter?
Maybe we allow for 2 hours and hope for it's shorter.
Yeah.
All right.
That's fine. And
We did good. We're gonna finish 15 minutes early here, so we're doing good.
And in-person hybrid again? You like that format?
Yes, yeah, because I may not be mobile yet. Yeah, I'm having my second knee done. So I may have to attend virtually. We'll see where I am.
Why don't we check in with you? And if you're gonna attend virtually, maybe everyone should, I don't know. but
Yeah, that's
you can get in
that's fine
person.
with me. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I would be virtual on that one.
Okay, so we'll tentatively plan for virtual.
The doctor's telling me 6 weeks, so that'll only be like 4.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm looking forward to getting the second one done. Get this over with.
Getting past it, though.
Yeah,
Right.
Then I can start my high jump career or something.
and probably around the same time of day.
Yeah,
All right, cool.
yeah, this seemed to work pretty good. Yeah. All right,
Alrighty.
anything else taken we need, or are we good?
I don't know, I looked, Annette, Aaron, anything else you can think of?
Think we're good?
No,
Think we're good? Thank you. All right,
Thank you all.
motion to adjourn?
I'm with John. I like these meetings too, so I'll be begging to be on the committee.
Okay.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the work.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Yeah, that was a great, that's a great document
Megan
taken.
and staff, great job putting all this together.
As always.
great. Thank you all.
Great. Bye-bye.
Agreed. Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Have a good afternoon.